I'm John Greenenberger, and I'm a child and adult psychologist, and I'm co-executive director of a nonprofit called the Center for Reflective Parenting, around all things related to parenting. I'm going to briefly introduce the rest of the group. Deborah Graining is the executive director here at Well Baby Center. We have Susie Leonard from Kids Place, the director there, and Eileen O'Sullivan, who's a RIE instructor, and also working here at Well Baby. So I'm going to say a few words about that relates to this idea of discipline and providing a loving way of creating discipline within families. It really is, I'm going to talk a little bit about attachment. In a nutshell, attachment looks at the relative balance between early relationships between children and their parents in terms of the balance between providing a sense of connection and understanding and closeness, maybe the feeling side of the relationship, being able to, it's empathy and compassion and the sense of helping children feel a secure connection. And then also the other side, which has to do with facilitating their autonomy, their exploration, their independence. It has to do with helping them with setting limits and with being able to move back and forth between those two, coming in closer when they need you and moving away when they're able to on their own. And the discipline piece is more on the latter of those two poles that I'm talking about. It's about, I think it's more about, really discipline in part is about saying, there's you with your needs, and here's a separate person. I'm your dad or your mom, and I have another agenda, and I may need to set a limit that is counter to what you're wanting at this particular moment. When a young child wants another cookie, and you come in and say, no, we've had 2 cookies, and that's going to be enough. That's asserting your separateness and their separateness. And the two go hand in hand. And I think a lot of times, the discipline side of things is the harder side for a lot of parents. And at the same time, from doing the research, we actually know that there's a great range in terms of this balance. And what we call secure attachment or secure reflective ways of parenting, there's an ability to straddle both. To be able to move in and make that connection, but also to be able to be separate and help your child deal with their frustration and deal with the real limits of the world. And then little less secure kinds of attachment tend to favor one or the other side. So there are some parents who are stronger at setting limits, maybe, but their limits might be a little bit rigid, and they have trouble connecting up with on a more emotional level. And on the other side of the continuum, moving away from the balance, there are parents who are super empathic and connected and more comfortable with emotions, but sometimes have a harder time around the separateness and setting limits. So we're always trying to get back towards the center, the balance between the two. I really like sort of the title of tonight's talk, because I think a lot of times we understand how that connecting side, when we're feeling close and we have a mutual understanding with our kids, that feels like that's where the love is. But actually, both sides require love, because it's hard to set limits. It's not fun, and often we get put in the position of being the bad guy. But really, to be able to follow through and realize the long-term benefit of that, I think, comes from a loving place. So it's also an opportunity, even though it's in the butt a lot of times. It's an opportunity to help your children grow and develop. And so that's kind of how we think about this topic. So, Eileen?
I was asked for this to focus more on the idea of how you parent in comparison to how other people parent, or maybe how your parents parented, and are full of advice for you on how to do it better, or the way they did it. And because that's a common thing that comes up. You can parent however you want, and then you go to the park and your kids still have to integrate with all these other kids, and you still want to be accepted and not look completely insane for your parenting choices. You don't want to feel rigid, and you don't want to feel overly permissive like your child, so you're constantly weighing these things when you're trying to set limits in front of your peers. So it starts out that way. It starts out that you end up with these people that you were in possibly a prenatal yoga class with, and you keep hanging out with them. Mm-hmm. And it turns out you don't have anything in common with the way they're going to parent, and then you start to, immediately the questions begin, because somebody seems to have it all together who is in that prenatal group with you, and you are flying by the seat of your pants, and you're just trying to get through the night, and you're just begin judging, and you begin comparing, and then you decide, then you start reading books. Because where did they get this information? Did they have some secret, inroads to this information? And then they start reading, and then they start trying to convince you that everybody should have the happiest, smartest baby in the world,
or on the block.
Or on the block, for instance. And then that is that the goal, and you start to manage. You start to get away from what works for your family, what works in the limits of your family, what your limits are. You start to get away from what you want. And if you left tonight with any one thing or two things for me, it would be that you spend more time observing your children with other children, with their peers. That doesn't mean just being with them. I mean, it's quietly sitting and watching them engage in an environment or with other people. And helping them through that, learn the limits of the natural order of things. The natural order of things is you don't throw sand at someone else, because then they will want to be away from you. And the natural order of things is, we have to go now because it's getting dark and it's time to go home. You have to go to bed now because it's dark and people sleep when it's dark. You're the authority in your household, and you can assume that authority position, and it doesn't have to be in relationship to the way everybody else does it. Ultimately, we set limits so that we have people we want to be around, not people we have to escape from all the time. You want to have somebody who you like, and that's your main function, is to make an acceptable person for you too, so your family can stay together as a unit.
I think that's really well said, Eileen. And I think that's the long-term goal, right? Discipline. The short-term goal is safety and fairness and being decent. But the long-term goal is that discipline becomes self-discipline. And I think Susie, you were going to talk a little bit about some of those ideas.
Yeah, and I'm very much in agreement with both of what you said. I was real pleased that Deborah and Eileen set up this evening, and pleased that I was included. Pleased because I can remember back on my struggles as a young parent, and this was the topic that I so needed and wanted answers to. I knew kids, I worked with kids, I had been a teacher even prior to having my own children, and it didn't matter because in some ways I think I set the bar way higher for myself than I could ever achieve. Where we do err is allowing our kids to deal with frustration, to struggle. I think that's our Achilles heel. I was telling Deborah before, when I was a young parent, my boys were about 2 or 4, and this is 30-something years ago, I went to one of my first rap sessions. During the talk, he said, it's not your job as a parent to make your child happy. And it was like a lightning bolt. It was like, really? You're kidding. Because for all these years, not only did I assume it, but my older son was going to hold me to task for it. We had a deal, and even though he might not have articulated it, he really felt at any time he was unhappy, it was my fault. And that was definitely a limitation of my parenting at that point. So I have so much empathy for parents struggling because I've been there. You look at your job as educating your children, and as Eileen said, that there are certain rules that are just an inherent part of being a citizen, a member of a particular group of a society, which is we don't grab toys that other people have. Sorry, it's not okay, it's not acceptable, it's not fair. We can't excuse our children from certain behavior that then infringes on other people's behavior, other kids' behavior, or even, adults' rights when they are out in public. And I think those are reasonable expectations. I think that they need to reflect who your child is and their capabilities. But you can start reflecting and discussing or talking with a child younger than they are capable of fulfilling certain tasks. I remember pushing the stroller through the market and having a conversation with my kids at 6 and 9 months old about what we were going to buy at the market. I did not expect them, to respond or even have any clue of what I was talking about.
They grabbed off the shelf.
Exactly, they did. But you know what? I would probably I would have taken it back and said, we're not going to get that. We don't need it. But the truth is, you can talk to your child without necessarily expecting that they are quite ready to be 100% responsive to whatever that expectation is. And as they get older, you will have created that framework. They had a word that's called cadre, which is a framework. And within that framework, they have lots of freedom. But there are some real rules and expectations. When we look at it as education, so our words to our kids are, you know what? You have a choice. You can do it, or I can help you do it. We have a circle time. We believe our kids at 2, 2.5 are really capable of coming on over. Sometimes they need help sitting. Sometimes we need to shorten the circle time because as a group they're not ready for it. But we believe that it's very important that they begin to learn that there are authority figures and the word of authority has a meaning, and so it's time to come on over. And there will be kids that don't hear, and so you go over and you say,
Selective.
that's right. Well, there are some kids that really do not hear because they're so immersed in what they're doing. There are some kids who clearly do hear and do not like what you're doing. And to those kids, it is, you have a choice. You can come over all by yourself, or I can help you. And that's the way it is.
And don't they also fit in more to the adult lifestyle in France? I mean, don't they have more of an expectation?
Absolutely.
We're having
Absolutely.
dinner, and
That's right.
and they need to sort of fit into our.
That's exactly right. And I think that the pendulum between the child rearing that I received in the 50s and the early 60s and where it's come now is pretty extreme. There was a time, even before my time and my parents' time, where children were to be seen and not heard. And now it's,
We can't show
that's right. Parents are
accessories.
that's exactly right.
Carrying them with us all the time.
That's exactly right. Our kids are ruling our life.
As parents today, as you say, the pendulum has swung. I mean, there's studies that show that the best outcome for children is this middle ground, this middle area where you're not so afraid of your child's displeasure or anger at you in the moment. You're not so afraid of that you let them be boss, which doesn't make them feel good because they feel like they're bullying you.
Meltdowns in and of themselves are not necessarily a sign of problems. I think there's probably an optimal amount of meltdowns, and it's not none. It isn't. It really isn't. I know they're not fun, but it's not none because there are children who never melt down, and the kids who don't show any distress at all. When we do physiological measures. There's some kids that show lots of distress, some kids that show distress but then can get re-regulated when the parent comes back and some that don't show any at all. Well, cortisol, which is a stress hormone, was the highest in the ones who didn't show any distress. It's pretty high in the ones that show a lot of stress and don't get calmed down. And it's the lowest in the kids that can show the feelings but get re-regulated.
Yeah,
So
it's resilience.
meltdowns are a part of early childhood.
That's right.
They just are. And being able to keep that in mind and not feel like they're a failure, that there can't be too many. And I think what you can start to think about is that one kind of signal is when a tantrum, you see a regular pattern of a tantrum being used strategically. That's a problem, right? Also knowing that kids have a range in terms of their frustration tolerance that has a biological contribution to. And some kids are just have a harder time regulating their behavior and their emotion.
What unfortunately as a mom, I set up the pattern of being in between their toddler beds and helping them soothe, they go to sleep, whether it's nap time, rest time, or evening time. And the plus side is that as a mom, I'm tired, so I use that time to meditate and go within and use that. So sometimes it's a good thing. All three of us are resting. So it's like, part of me is okay with this, but there's the other piece. As our life is evolving and changing, the girls are almost 5, it's different. If my husband comes home earlier, then I want to be with him, out having dinner. So it's like the natural order of things in our family is shifting. So now I'm more at the place where I want to say, Emma, Abby, good night. Finish the routine and be able to say goodnight, kiss them, and tuck them in, and be able to close the door and go out to my husband and have the rest of my life in the evening. That's unfortunately they're not on board with that yet.
I would take an intermediate step. So I wouldn't go from you're staying until they literally fall asleep to or you're on your own and I'm done.
Yeah.
I would do check-ins. So I would suggest saying. Like Eileen and Deborah said, another time of the day, sort of talk, about the problem, and then I'm going to go for 5 minutes and do some dishes, and I promise you, I'm going to come back, but I'm going to need you to stay in bed.
Identical problem. Plus, since we have a second daughter, which is only a year old, who sleeps in the early morning hours, often in our bed, which is already one bed guest, basically. My older daughter, which is now 3, made it the habit, since ever she saw that the younger one is sleeping there, to get up the minute she opens her eyes in the night, just to turn. She gets out of bed, she runs into our room. And we get her back, maybe once, you have that energy, maybe twice, and that's where your energy ends, and she comes a third time, and she comes the fourth time, and if she doesn't, if you leave her alone, you don't stay with her, then until she falls solidly asleep, she is screaming the neighborhood together, basically. And we have a house, you would think it's not an issue, but our baby daughter, her sleep patterns would be entirely ruined if we let her throw her little fit, every couple hours, basically, even just for a few weeks. So we hushing her down somehow, and we doing what she wants for the sake of the other daughter at least getting some sleep.
Was the older daughter in your room before the new one came?
No, she actually had a night, she was very early sleeping through the night. When she was 3 or 4 months old, she slept at least until 6:30 in the morning, which we were very happy with. And she didn't come in the night
I have an
at all.
idea. So one thing you could do around something like this would be something called storytelling technique. And you could make a little book, very simple little book out of construction paper, 8 pages maybe, fold it in half, staple down the sides, stick figures. And what's your daughter's name?
The older one is Mia.
Mia? So, this is Mia's family. Mia lives with whoever she lives with, her mommy and her daddy, and they lived alone in this house. And then, age 2, Mommy got pregnant. a little picture, and your belly starts to get bigger, And then, page 3, it's even bigger. And page 4, the baby comes, and you very simple. You don't have to be an artist. You're giving her something, which is, first of all, that you're understanding what's going on, and you narrate it in a very simple way. There's no moralizing. It's not, and now she's going to learn how to stay in her room at night. It's just telling the story. And then you can give it to them, and maybe they read it once, and maybe they read it 30 times. That's hard to know ahead of time. But it's a way of helping them get out of their experience and start to begin to reflect. Yeah, because what you're narrating really is the change, the shift. Her world is turned upside down, right? And there are good things about it, and you could put maybe, sometimes she likes to, help mommy change baby's diaper, the little one's diaper. You can put the positive things, but you can also put the hard things in there.
My question is how to handle the I want to do it by myself thing, which I love and which I know she gets from me because my first words were myself and the same with her. So, but it takes, if you've got 15 minutes to get to school or whatever and she wants to do it by herself, everything, and it takes forever. I don't want to crush her little independent spirit, but we gotta go.
That was the sort of the theme.
Okay.
Question.
Yeah, and
How do
then
you
she
care
gets
about
in there,
English
yeah.
without crushing this? When you want a spirited child, you get a spirited child, and that's the good news and the bad news. They're going to have a voice. They're going to feel empowered, and and again, it's one of these situations where rocks are hard. We need to go. And she doesn't have to be happy about it if you really don't have a choice here. Some things aren't a choice. Safety issues aren't a choice. They don't, but we're so afraid of our children's unhappiness. There's something from Corinne Seeds, my children briefly went to UES, and the founder wrote something called The Right to be Unhappy. And this person said, if I could have done it over again, I wouldn't have been so hijacked by my children's unhappiness. I would have allowed them to have a whole range of feelings, including unhappy.
But if you give them a warning, we're gonna have to leave in 5 minutes, so if you wanna do this yourself, put your shoes on yourself or whatever it is, by self, then you need to do it right now.
Possibly you can you can let her do it by self, but there are also going to be those times where you're going to have to step in. There's a thing that I really love from the Circle of Security Project, which is a related attachment-based program up in Spokane, Washington. They have a little thing on their website. They talk about everything you need to know about parenting in 25 words or less. And I'll see if I can say it accurately. It's, whenever possible, follow your child's lead. So that's when you can.
When you can.
Whenever necessary, take charge. And always remember to be bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind. And that covers a lot, right? You're following your child's lead when you can, taking charge. It is. It's always not always be that, but always try to come back to that place.
And don't be afraid to be firm with your child. Look at me, go down to their level, not with anger, but with firmness. And firmness is not cruelty. So you need to know in your mind you're not being cruel. As a therapist, if I'm talking to somebody, I need to know I am not being cruel by, telling them something that they may not want to hear. I have to know what my intention is, and every parent has to know what their intention is. And if their intention is true to their heart, it will work.
I think one of the most important things I just want to emphasize in what she just said in walking through that process is the space from which the parent is coming on the inside, and how that is something that children sense and feel and won't be able to articulate or put words to.
Right.
But it's immensely important. It's just as important as what you do.
Yes.
And so that little way of, the mindfulness practice of getting centered, sometimes it's about, taking time away before you come and set the limit. Sometimes it's about connecting up and getting support from a partner. But those things that help you be in that more centered place as opposed to the reactive place, then it's much easier to